From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. The military leader of the coup in Sudan, Awad Ibn Auf, has stepped down just a day after ousting the President Omar Al-Bashir. Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah Al-Burhan has become the new chief of the ruling military council. Protests continue on the streets of the capital Khartoum following Al-Bashir's removal and arrest. People have been demanding the military hand power to a civilian transitional government. Meanwhile, thousands of protesters held Friday prayers outside the military headquarters as they continue calling for a full democratic transition. The protesters are demanding fresh elections to form a new government.
The military council will be the guarantor of a civilian government to be formed in collaboration with political forces and stakeholders. The Military Transitional Council has pledged to abide by all international and regional agreements and mechanisms.
Meanwhile, an unidentified Sudanese soldier warmed the hearts of the protesters gathered outside the military headquarters when he serenaded them with his impressive saxophone skills. Dozens of excited supporters swarmed the soldier, dropping him in the country's flag as he blasted a number of beautiful melodies. Algerians have gathered for the first Friday of protest since the announcement of presidential elections to succeed ousted leader Abdelaziz Bouteflika. The demonstrators defied the police who tried to detain them. They say the elections cannot be free and fair if they are held under the same judicial framework and institutions as that of the Bouteflika regime. The presidential elections are scheduled for July. Gunfire was heard in Libya's capital Tripoli on Friday as Eastern forces fought troops of the internationally recognized government in the southern suburbs. Haftar fighters have reportedly bombed the Serah camp in Suwara towards the Tunisian border. The Libyan National Army advanced on the coastal city a week ago. The battles have killed about 80 people. And in the midst of this conflict, thousands of civilians have fled their homes in fear of the intensifying shootings. Tripoli residents have endured wars and gunshots since the deposition of the former leader Muammar Gaddafi 8 years ago. This is the third conflict they have been forced to go through.
Relatively speaking, citizens in general have got used to the war. That is because for us, this is the third war. For Tripoli, life still is normal to a great degree, even though schools are closed and education is on hold. The attack was honestly unexpected. We had hoped that there would be, for example, a collective conference and that the country would be able to move forward in a stable manner. We do not like what is happening in Tripoli. I'm speaking personally. We do not want military rule, but at the same time, we do not want to be ruled by militias. We want a civil rule. We want there to be stability and a better future for our children.
And as people are on the move fleeing from the war, fears of disease outbreaks grip the capital. The World Health Organization says it fears outbreaks of infectious diseases due to dirty water. The World Health Organization has set up emergency facilities and is giving out hospital supplies.
WHO is working with local health authorities to preposition and provide supplies to hospitals treating those who are in need of medical treatment. Obviously, with the situation escalating, we are afraid of further health risks, such as outbreak of diseases, as people are on the move and they are being displaced from their homes.
Moving on, Ecuadorian citizens demonstrated on Thursday in support of Julian Assange after the government removed his 7-year asylum inside its embassy in London. Dozens of people gathered outside the foreign ministry in Quito to reject the decision by the government of Lenin Moreno to hand Assange over to the British police. The police in the UK said the WikiLeaks founder was arrested following a U.S. extradition request. His legal team has vowed to fight those proceedings.
He's the only one who gave his life for the truth and for the justice of the people. So we are sad, but above all, indignant. We are going to continue in the fight. We are not going to stay quiet. We will continue to support this man not to be extradited to the US, because what awaits him is that he will go missing and be killed. It's not a joke. No kidding. This is serious. It's very serious what is happening.
And Olabini was arrested in Ecuador for allegedly being linked to Julian Assange. According to the Interior Minister Maria Paula Romo, the man was detained for investigative purposes. According to one of Assange's lawyers, Carlos Poveda, the Ecuadorian authorities did not allow Bini to meet with his lawyer. Earlier, we spoke to Ecuador's former Foreign Minister Guillaume Long about his thoughts on the arrest of the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange and the reasons why Ecuador's government removed his asylum status.
My reaction is, I think yesterday was a very sad day for freedom of expression, for whistleblowers worldwide, for the people who dare to expose exactions, crimes, wrongdoing on behalf of the powerful. I think behind all this lurks some kind of vengeance on behalf of the powerful actors of this world, the global power, namely the United States, for WikiLeaks having revealed so much information on some of the worst human rights abuses in Iraq and Afghanistan and elsewhere. So obviously I think there are all sorts of issues, including issues of accountability, of democracy, of freedom of expression. And yesterday was a dark day for that. I think Mr. Assange's future is uncertain. It's a very dangerous situation that he faces if he's extradited to the United States. And we should all work very hard for this to be avoided. But if he's extradited to the United States, he could face terrible repercussions. I mean, we saw what happened to his source, to Chelsea Manning, who had a 35-year jail sentence and was held in inhumane conditions, terrible conditions of incarceration, including total isolation, something which was denounced by a number of human rights organizations and multilateral organization in the world as torture. So I think it's fair to say that, as the Special Rapporteur on Torture said last week, Julian Assange is in risk of being tortured and, of course, persecuted politically for what he did back in 2010. Yeah, I think there are two main reasons why Lenin Moreno decided to do what he did, and he is going to. It comes at a high cost for him. We shouldn't forget that he's in blatant violation of international law and the principle of non-refoulement, which is basically the prohibition that states have once they've granted political asylum to someone to reverse this, to put an end to the asylum if the conditions for the asylum haven't changed, if the grounds on which asylum was given hasn't changed. And clearly, if he's extradited to the United States, those conditions haven't changed, because that was the reason in the first place why Ecuador gave Mr. Assange political asylum. So I think for Mr. Moreno, there are going to be big consequences, possibly even legal consequences in the future. But I think there are two main reasons why I did this. The first one is his realignment with the United States. Since he was sworn in office in May 2017, we saw it in a number of areas: foreign policy, in all sorts of aspects, his position towards Venezuela, his denouncing of the Treaty of UNASUR, when Ecuador is the headquarters of UNASUR, which is absolutely surreal. But UNASUR, the United States was always sort of fairly opposed opposed to the idea of UNASUR, so that's also a sign of realignment with the United States. Generally speaking, well, a number of things, including going back on the Chevron Texaco policy, but also being generally much more aligned with the Trump administration. So I think that's broadly one reason. There is even a New York Times report that says that the IMF loan was essentially conditioned on by the United States, which has a veto inside the IMF, on Ecuador handing over Julian Assange. This is the more geopolitical explanation. And then, as you said, there is a more personal sort of vengeful sort of personal retaliation on behalf of Moreno, because last week WikiLeaks circulated the information on the inner papers, which is basically a major corruption scandal, which involves Moreno.
We'll take a short break now. Join us in a few. Welcome back. An Ecuadorian court in the city of Puyo is hearing a lawsuit filed by the Waurani indigenous community against the government. The Waurani community, who belong to the Amazonas area, has sued the government, accusing them of harming their territory and violating their human rights. They allege that their 500,000 acres of biodiverse land is at risk as the authorities are willing to allow oil extraction there. Nearly 200 Wauranis came to attend the court hearing.
We are here present to claim our rights, to claim that justice, because the people of the state were deceiving, saying that the consultation offered many materials, but they never informed us of the impact it would have on our communities. Our land is not going to be resold, nor are we going to give them permission to enter our territory.
Venezuela's Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has announced that the government in Argentina did not allow a flight part of the return to the homeland plan to operate. Arreaza said on Twitter that the government of Mauricio Macri is violating the human rights of 90 Venezuelan citizens who wish to return to their country. Since the program began, more than 13,000 Venezuelans have returned home. Our correspondent Edgardo Esteban spoke to Venezuelans who share the affairs in Argentina about this situation.
We are here at the Venezuelan embassy in Buenos Aires after President Mauricio Macri prevented a flight with 90 Venezuelan migrants passengers from leaving Argentina. This flight was part of the return to the homeland plan implemented by the Bolivarian government. We are being joined by Venezuela's Charge d'Affaires, Juan José Valero, to talk more about this. Several families are now stranded here and don't know what to do. They had high expectations of going back to the country, and this hasn't been the case.
We are very worried about the government of Argentina refusing the permits to allow a Venezuelan flight to operate in its country. This flight has the character of humanitarian help under the Back to the Homeland plan. This would have been our fourth flight looking to take Venezuelan migrants back to their country, and the first this year. It was aiming to take back 90 people. 300 people have already benefited from this program in the past. The decision taken by the government of Argentina is directly affecting the human rights promoted by the Back to the Homeland plan. We are calling on the Argentine authorities to reconsider their decision and to consider the project's humanitarian character and to allow the flight to operate. We are also calling on all those who are hoping to return to keep their faith and hopes up.
What reasons are Argentina's government giving for not allowing this flight to operate?
I haven't received any official communication, but I was told that the permit wasn't approved on the phone. I asked this to be put in writing, but that hasn't happened. I've been calling non-stop, but the answer has been the same. They haven't given us any reason as to why the permit was denied. The flight was supposed to arrive in Argentina earlier today, but couldn't leave Venezuela as we didn't have the necessary permits for the flight to operate. Past flights have been allowed without any problem, and that's why we're worried. We don't know what the motives are for not allowing this flight to operate right now.
What are the needs of the 90 people that are waiting?
A lot of these people have been living in temporary shelters. Others already left their homes here and have nowhere to go. When we told them the flight wasn't coming, they were visibly affected. But we're trying to do everything possible to keep our commitment and help them return home.
We thank Edgardo for that report. The Cuban government has set up a special unit to coordinate with Kenyan authorities following the kidnapping of 2 Cuban doctors in northern Kenya. Authorities named the 2 doctors. One is Acel Herrera Correa, a specialist in integral general medicine, while the other is Landy Rodriguez Hernandez, a surgeon. The 2 doctors were working in Kenya's Mandera County, which borders Ethiopia and Somalia. Kenyan police have said the suspect, the jihadi Somali group Al-Shabaab, is behind the kidnapping. They also confirmed that the doctor's police protection officer was killed.
Under the escort of 2 police officers, one officer from Administration Police and the other one from Kenya Police Service respectively. Along the way, they were blocked by 2 Probox vehicles, 2 Probox cars. Unfortunately, the Administration Police officer was shot and fatally wounded. The criminals commandeered the car and the occupants across the border to Somalia.
Jamaica Supreme Court has ruled that aspects of the controversial National Identification and Registration Act are in violation of the Constitution. This means that the entire law is now null and void. In delivering the judgment, the Chief Justice said the court unanimously decided that the mandatory requirement for people to submit biometric information is a violation of their right to privacy. The national ID system had proposed a secure way of verifying a citizen's identity. The court action was brought by the opposition. And still in Jamaica, the government has begun selling its shares in the Jamaica Public Service, the island's sole electricity generation and distribution company. The company has assets of nearly $1 billion and revenues of some $760 million. The government owns just under 20%.
These are assets that Jamaicans should own. Now, you may be saying, well, if they're government-owned, Jamaicans own them. There is a distinction between the voter owning a company and the shareholder owning a company. Shareholders are better than voters in holding the management and directors of companies to account.
The members of the Abortion Commissioner in Argentina have confirmed that the abortion bill will be presented in the parliament on May 28th. It will be the 8th time that the bill will be presented to be discussed. Last year, the Senate rejected the bill after it was approved in the lower house. This was followed by a nationwide campaign for legal, secure, and free abortion that had intensified, putting pressure on lawmakers. 2 people have been killed in Rio de Janeiro after 2 buildings collapsed. Authorities say 2 more were injured. Locals say 4 families were living in the buildings, which were undergoing construction. Rescue teams are looking for survivors, which may be buried. The unlicensed buildings could have been affected by the heavy rains that left 10 dead a few days ago. And Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has spread controversy by saying his country will vote in the United Nations based on the Bible. Bolsonaro made the statement during a meeting with evangelical pastors organized by Silas Malafaia, one of Brazil's most radical religious leaders. This comes a few days after Bolsonaro said he is actively working with the U.S. to infiltrate Venezuela's military. Now to Europe, where the electoral campaign for the general election in Spain has kicked off. Polls show that the current PSOE government could maintain power supported by regional nationalist parties, or right-wing parties could take control of parliament. Fears have grown over the increasing influence of the far right after the Vox party won 12 seats in the 109-seat Andalusian parliament last year. The election is set for April 28th, in which the voters will choose 586 lawmakers in both chambers of the parliament. The electoral campaign has also kicked off in Catalonia. 5 of the candidates running for parliament are imprisoned by Spanish authorities in Madrid. Our correspondent Joan Ortiz explains.
The electoral campaign has started with an extraordinary situation here in Catalonia, as 5 of the candidates running in these elections are contesting from prison. The Spanish judiciary has already said that they won't be allowed to leave jail to campaign or participate in any debate. The only chance for them to get out of the jail is if they are elected and need to get their parliament seat. 2 of these prisoners are the leading candidates for their parties, Oriol Junqueras for Esquerra Republicana and Jordi Sánchez for Junts per Catalunya. Let's recall that in these elections, the Nationalist Party could be key to face a right-wing alliance. The Socialist Party may need support from left-wing parties, such as Unidas Podemos and also the nationalist parties, among them the Catalan ones. We are just 2 weeks away from this election. We will keep you updated.
We'll take a short break now. Don't go away. Welcome back. The UN Special Rapporteur has said France committed human rights abuses against homeless people. The Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, Leilani Farah, says the country is failing to protect the most vulnerable. France has seen a rise of homeless people in the last decade due to the economic crisis. According to the national statistics body, more than 12,000 people sleep rough on the streets.
Here in France, the system is such that people aren't even accessing the most basic emergency services. So they're calling this 115 hotline that's supposed to connect them with emergency services. They're getting, if they're lucky to get through on the phone, and if they're even luckier to get a place, they get that place for one night, maybe 2 nights. Then they have to they're basically ejected and then back on the streets. So without even the most emergency services, it doesn't surprise me that people would be dying on the streets.
Hundreds of Palestinian prisoners have entered day 5 of their mass hunger strike in several Israeli prisons. Protesters in the occupied West Bank demonstrated in solidarity with the hunger strikers. The prisoners are calling for an end to repressive measures imposed by a newly formed committee headed by the Israeli Public Security Minister to worsen conditions for detained Palestinians and reduce their standard of living. Our correspondent in Cairo, Nayara Tardo, has more.
In its report, the international social justice group Tadamon revealed that Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails are being used as guinea pigs for medical experimentation. Head of the High Follow-up Committee for Arabs in Israel, Mohammed Baraka, has also raised this concern, calling it a crime against humanity. He accused the government of giving the green light to several large pharmaceutical firms to conduct these medical tests. Meanwhile, the report also reveals that some 980 Palestinian minors are also being held in Israeli jails, and many of them were arrested during clashes with soldiers when their families' homes were being demolished, especially in the West Bank. As they watched their homes being destroyed, many families were harassed by Israeli soldiers. This, of course, provoked confrontation between family members and the military officials. So in some instances, this is what landed many Palestinians in jail. Last Sunday, hundreds of Palestinian prisoners launched a mass hunger strike over deteriorating conditions inside the jails. Prisoners are also calling for an end to what they say are harsh and oppressive conditions sanctioned by the government. Palestinian prisoners are also protesting against the ban on family visits for prisoners from the Gaza Strip. You may recall that over the past few months, the situation in occupied territories has intensified, particularly during the election campaign of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It has promoted the illegal construction of Jewish settlements in Palestine, especially in the West Bank. This in turn has intensified the conflict and made worse the plight of the Palestinian people.
We thank Nayara Tardo for that report. A unique digital art exhibit has opened in China at a former industrial site in Shanghai. The immersive show, called Universe of Water Particles, was created by Japanese art collective Team Lab. Visitors can take pictures with the display, which includes a flower waterfall, a rice field, and hanging lamps. They can also interact with the exhibit by creating a flow of water and flowers by walking through it. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.